In the mist-shrouded village of Kattegat, a promised bride from distant lands arrives to find herself rejected for her warrior ways. The chieftain's son who sent for her turns away in disgust at her scarred hands and talk of battle. His fatal error becomes clear when a raid descends upon their settlement, and the woman's blade dance leaves 7 sphere warriors dead before the village men can even lift their axes. Before we continue this saga, tell us in the comments where you're watching, from across Midgard. If this tale of valor touches your spirit, ensure you're subscribed to our channel. For tomorrow we bring you the blood-soaked history of the shield wall at Stamford Bridge. The longship appeared through the morning fog, like a sea serpent emerging from Jormungander's domain, its dragon-head prow cutting silently through the still waters of the fjord. At the stern stood Freydis Eiriksdottir, her crimson hair whipping in the salt breeze, eyes fixed on the approaching shoreline of Kattegat. Unlike the other women traveling aboard, she wore no colorful apron dress nor delicate brooches. Instead, her tall frame was draped in a simple blue woolen tunic, cinched by a leather belt, from which hung an ornate seax knife, its handle worn smooth from years of use. This journey had not been her choice. 3 seasons prior, her father's settlement in the eastern lands had been destroyed by rival clans. With her family slaughtered and their homestead burned, Freydis had fought alongside the few surviving warriors, earning the respect of even the most hardened shield-bearers. But when the fighting ceased and survivors regrouped, the Elder Council saw her only as a woman unwed, a problem to be solved through alliance rather than a sword arm to be valued. The arrangement had been made with Håkon Thorvaldsson, son of Kattegat's chieftain. A bride price was negotiated, Freydis's reputation as skilled in household arts greatly exaggerated, her protests silenced by duty to the remaining members of her clan who needed the alliance for protection. Now, as Kattegat's wooden docks emerged, from the mist, her hand unconsciously tightened around the iron pendant that hung at her neck, the broken half of her father's arm ring, all that remained of her lineage. "Smile, Freydis," urged Astrid, a young woman who had accompanied her on this journey as handmaiden and companion. "Your new husband awaits. I hear Håkon Thorvaldsson is handsome, and his father's holdings are vast." "I care not for his looks or lands," Freydis replied, her voice low. "I come because duty demands it, not because my heart sings for some chieftain's son who purchases wives from distant shores." The oarsmen guided the ship alongside the wooden pier with practiced precision. Kattegat bustled with activity despite the early hour, fishermen mending nets, traders arranging goods, children running between longhouses with excited shouts. The settlement was larger than Freydis had anticipated, its buildings more permanent, with intricately carved posts supporting timber structures that spoke of wealth and stability. A small delegation waited at the dock, men in fine wool cloaks, fastened with silver brooches, women in their best dresses adorned with amber and glass beads. At their center stood a young man whose bearing marked him as someone of importance. Håkon Thorvaldsson had indeed been blessed by the gods with a pleasing face, strong jaw, clear blue eyes, and hair the color of summer wheat braided in the style of warriors. Yet, Freydis noted immediately how soft his hands appeared as he extended them in greeting to the ship's captain, how his sword hung at his side like an ornament rather than a weapon of necessity. "Welcome to Kattegat," he announced as the gangplank was secured. "The journey has been long, but now you shall find comfort in your new home." The other women disembarked first, giggling nervously as they were presented to their arranged husbands or led away to serve in wealthy households. Freydis remained, gathering her few possessions, a shield small enough to be dismissed as decorative by those who did not know better, a bundle containing simple clothes, and a wooden box housing her most precious items, a bone comb that had belonged to her mother, a small vial of rare ointment useful for treating wounds, and wrapped in oiled cloth, the iron arrowhead that had pierced her shoulder during her first battle, kept as a reminder that survival often hinged on the breadth of a hair. When finally she stepped onto the dock, Hakon's welcoming smile faltered. His eyes traveled from her practical leather boots up to her unadorned tunic, lingering momentarily on the knife at her belt before reaching her face. Whatever vision he had conjured of his bride from distant shores, perhaps a demure, gentle creature with downcast eyes and soft hands, clearly bore little resemblance to the woman who stood before him. "You are Freydis Eirik's daughter?" he asked, uncertainty evident in his voice. "I am," she replied simply, meeting his gaze directly. Another transgression against the expected behavior of a proper bride. Thorvald, the chieftain himself, stepped forward then. Unlike his son, his body bore the marks of battles long past, a scar that cleaved his left eyebrow and continued down his cheek, fingers missing from his right hand, the measured gait of a man who had taken a spear through his thigh and lived to tell the tale. His assessment of Freydis was quick and shrewd. "We expected more women like the others," he said bluntly, gesturing to the brides who had already been escorted toward the settlement. "Your hands tell a different story than what was promised." Freydis glanced down at her palms, calloused. Not from weaving and cooking, but from rowing and wielding weapons. She made no attempt to hide them or offer excuses. "My hands can build a home or defend it," she answered. "They can stitch a wound as easily as cloth. What more should hands do?" A few of the warriors standing behind Thorvald exchanged glances, one suppressing what might have been a smile. The chieftain himself remained impassive, but his son's displeasure was plainly written across his features. "We were told you were skilled in a woman's arts," Haken said, his tone hardening. "That you would bring knowledge of Eastern medicines and crafts to enhance our household. I know which herbs heal battle wounds and which bring swift death," Freydis replied. "I can read the stars to navigate by sea and track game through forest when stores run low." "Are these not valuable skills for your household?" Murmurs rippled through the assembled witnesses. Hakon's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, while his father's expression remained unreadable. The tension was broken by the arrival of another figure, an older woman adorned with the keys and symbols of the settlement's head of household. "Enough of this spectacle on the docks," she declared, her authority evident despite her lack of physical stature. "I am Sigrid, wife of Thorvald, mistress of this hall. Come, girl, we will speak in private." The great hall of Kattegat stood at the settlement's center, its high-peaked roof visible above the surrounding structures. Inside, fire pits ran down the central aisle, providing both warmth and light to the vast space. Wooden pillars carved, with images of gods and heroes supported the roof, while shields and weapons adorned the walls, some clearly for display, bearing intricate decorations, others showing the dents and repairs of actual combat. Sigrid led Freydis to a private chamber off the main hall, dismissing the attendants with a wave of her hand. Once alone, she circled Freydis slowly, assessing her with the calculating gaze of a trader evaluating goods. "You were not what they expected," Sigrid stated matter-of-factly. "But expectations rarely align with reality, especially when men do." The negotiating. "I made no claims about myself," Freydis responded. "Those who arranged this marriage spoke for me. Yet you came anyway, knowing the deception." "I came because my people needed this alliance. What happens now is for your family to decide." Sigrid nodded, seeming to appreciate the directness of Freydis's answer. "My son has spent his life preparing to lead through politics and trade rather than conquest. He seeks a wife to strengthen his position through her femininity and social graces, areas where he perceives you lack." "And what do you seek in a daughter by marriage?" Freydis asked boldly. A hint of amusement flickered across Sigrid's face. "Interesting question, one that reveals much about you." She moved to a wooden chest, extracting a bundle wrapped in fine linen. "For now, you will be given lodging in the household. The marriage will be delayed, while we determine the best course of action." Freydis understood the diplomatic phrasing, rejection wrapped in politeness. The alliance would likely stand, but her position would be reduced from bride to something less defined, perhaps ultimately a servant or, at best, a free woman under the chieftain's protection, but without the status marriage would have provided. I understand, she said simply. The days that followed established a fragile routine. Freydis was given quarters in a small outbuilding attached to the main hall, not the shameful banishment to servants' quarters that some had expected, but clearly not the honored position of a new bride either. She was assigned tasks that kept her largely away from Hakon, tending to stores and assisting with preserving the abundant autumn harvest, rather than the more visible household duties that would have placed her in the center of Kattegat's social life. For his part, Hakon made little effort to conceal his disappointment and resentment. When their paths crossed, his acknowledgement was minimal, his gaze often directed through her rather than at her. Rumors circulated that negotiations had already begun with another clan for a more suitable match, one that would provide him with a wife whose greatest battles were fought with needle and loom rather than shield and blade. Yet not everyone in Kattegat shared Hakon's assessment. Thorvald himself often observed Freydis as she worked, noting the efficiency of her movements and her unflagging energy. The warriors who trained daily in the open area behind the Great Hall began to notice her watching their practice sessions, her eyes tracking their techniques with the evaluation of one who understood combat, rather than a woman merely admiring men's prowess. On the 5th day after her arrival, as Freydis carried bundles of dried herbs from the storage huts to the main hall, she became aware of a figure watching her from the shadow of a nearby building. Unlike the curious stares or disapproving glances she had grown accustomed to, this gaze carried weight, the measured assessment of a predator recognizing another of its kind. The man stepped forward, revealing himself with deliberate slowness. He was older than most of Thorvald's active warriors, perhaps 40 winters, his dark hair and beard streaked with silver. Unlike Thorvald's household guards with their matching cloaks and weapons maintained for both function and display, this man's appearance suggested a life spent on the edges of society. His cloak was weather-beaten but of good quality, his sword plain but positioned for swift drawing. Most telling were his eyes, pale gray like winter ice, and similarly devoid of warmth. "You carry that knife like one who knows its purpose," he said without preamble, nodding toward the seax at her belt. "Not as ornament." Freydis adjusted her grip on the herb bundles, ensuring one hand remained free. "A knife is a tool first, a weapon second. I know both uses." "As do I." He made no move to approach closer, maintaining a distance that acknowledged mutual wariness. "They call me Eirik Ravenson, once of this settlement, now returned after many seasons away." The name stirred something in Freydis's memory, fragments of conversation overheard during her brief time in Kattegat. Eirik Ravenson, a name spoken, in hushed tones, often accompanied by glances over shoulders as if the mere mention might summon ill fortune. "You are the one they call Ulfhjoin," she said, recalling the whispers. Wolfskin, a berserker who had sailed with the most feared raiders of the western seas before disappearing years ago, presumed dead until his unexpected return just days before her own arrival. He inclined his head slightly, neither confirming nor denying the title. "And you are the bride who fights like a shield maiden. We are both disappointments to Hakon Thorvaldsson, though for different reasons." Before Freydis could respond, a horn blasted from the settlement's northern approach. 3 short bursts followed by one long note, the warning signal for approaching strangers, not the alarm of imminent attack, but a call for warriors to stand ready. Eirik's posture shifted instantly, hand moving to his sword hilt as he turned toward the sound. Freydis likewise dropped the herb bundles, her right hand falling to her seax. "Sver traders, most likely," Eirik said, his voice low. "They come each autumn with amber and furs." But even as he spoke, the horn sounded again, this time the urgent, continuous blast that signaled danger. Shouts erupted throughout the settlement as warriors rushed to collect weapons, Women hurried children toward the safety of the great hall, while those assigned defensive positions moved with practiced efficiency to their posts. Not traitors, Freydis observed unnecessarily. Eric's expression had transformed, a cold alertness replacing his previous measured calm. The patrol boats would have seen a raiding party approaching by water. This comes from the forest road. Together they moved toward the northern edge of the settlement, joining the flow of armed defenders responding to the alarm. As they reached the outskirts of Kattegat, the cause of the disturbance became clear. A small scouting party had returned, one man draped across his companion's shoulders, clearly wounded. Behind them came the settlement's hunters, half carrying a man Freydis recognized as one of Thorvald's advisors, blood soaking through a makeshift bandage on his thigh. "Sphere war party," gasped one of the scouts as Thorvald pushed through the gathering crowd. 2 ship crews at least, moving through the forest to approach from land rather than sea. "Cowards' tactics," spat a warrior near Freydis. "They fear to face us directly." "Clever tactics," corrected Eirik quietly. "They know our watchtowers scan the fjord, not the forest paths." Thorvald began issuing commands with the calm precision of a leader long experienced in crisis. Warriors were dispatched to defensive positions, women organized into groups to prepare bandages and move supplies into the protected storehouse, craftsmen tasked with readying additional weapons. Hakon appeared at his father's side, armed but visibly tense. His eyes widened slightly upon noticing Freydis standing near Eirik, but he quickly looked away, focusing instead on his father's instructions. When the initial orders had been given, Thorvald turned to his son. "Take 10 men and secure the southern. Approach," he commanded. "If this is a diversion, we cannot leave ourselves exposed." "Father, let me stand with you at the main defense," Hakon argued, clearly eager to prove himself in the coming battle. "The southern position is crucial," Thorvald replied firmly. "I need someone I trust there." The diplomatic phrasing of his refusal was clear to all who heard it. Hakon would be kept from the heart of the fighting. As Hakon reluctantly gathered his assigned warriors, Freydis moved toward the great hall where women were collecting weapons to distribute. Rather than joining them, she slipped inside the building and made her way to her small quarters. From beneath her sleeping platform, she retrieved the shield she had brought aboard the longship. Small enough to be dismissed as decorative, yet crafted for a woman's arm in serious combat. When she re-emerged into the great hall, she found Sigrid directing the household's defense preparations. The older woman's eyes fixed on Freydis's shield, then moved to the determined set of her. "Ja, you mean to fight," Sigrid stated, no question in her tone. "I do. My son would forbid it if he knew. Your husband might welcome another blade, regardless of who wields it." Sigrid studied her for a long moment before giving a single sharp nod. "Take this," she said, removing an axe from the wall, smaller than a traditional battle axe but clearly forged for war rather than woodcutting. "It belonged to my sister before fever took her. She too preferred action to words." Freydis accepted the weapon, testing its balance. Well crafted and cared for despite years of disuse. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Sigrid replied grimly. "Prove your worth first. Defend our home. Then we shall see what place Kattegat might hold for you." Outside, a second alarm horn sounded from the northern perimeter. The attackers had been sighted approaching the settlement's edge. Freydis moved swiftly through the crowded hall and out into the pale sunlight of late afternoon. Warriors had formed a defensive line at the northern approach, shields overlapping, spears bristling. Outward, behind them, archers notched arrows, ready to provide covering fire. Instead of joining the shield wall, Freydis circled toward a group of buildings that provided a vantage point overlooking the approaching forest path. There she found Eirik Ravenson, sword drawn, watching the tree line with predatory focus. He acknowledged her presence with a glance, noting her shield and axe without comment. "They will come through there," he said, indicating a section of forest where the undergrowth provided cover nearly to the settlement's edge. The main force will engage our warriors directly while a smaller group circles to strike from the flank. How can you be certain? Freydis asked, though she recognized the tactical wisdom of his assessment. The cold smile that crossed his face held no humor. Because it is what I would do, and their leader is Bjorn Blackhand, who once sailed under my command before betraying me to claim my ship and reputation as his own. Before Freydis could respond, movement at the forest edge confirmed Eric's prediction. A wave of painted shields emerged from the tree line, sphere warriors advancing in. A tight formation toward Kattegat's defenders. Battle cries erupted from both sides as the distance closed, arrows arcing overhead to strike among the attackers, answered by thrown spears from the sphere ranks. There, Eric hissed, pointing to a barely perceptible movement along the settlement's edge, shadows detaching from the forest at a different angle from the main assault. The flanking party. 8, perhaps 10 warriors. Freydis tightened her grip on the axe. Then we are outnumbered. We have surprise, Eric countered, already, moving toward the approaching threat. And I have waited 3 years to return Bjorn Blackhand's betrayal in kind. As the sounds of battle erupted at the main defensive line, the crash of shields, the ring of steel on steel, the shouts of men fighting and dying, Freydis followed Eric toward the smaller threat that might, if successful, unravel Kattegat's entire defense. The flanking party of sphere warriors moved with practiced silence, their faces darkened with mud and ash to blend with the forest shadows. Each man bore the markings of experienced raiders, scarred forearms, well-worn weapons gripped with the casual confidence of those long accustomed to their use, eyes constantly scanning for threats rather than fixed solely on their objective. They advanced in loose formation through the narrow space between Kattegat's outermost buildings and the forest edge, clearly intent on striking the settlement's defenders from behind, while their attention remained fixed on the main assault. Making. Our video took many hours of research and production, so if you're enjoying this Viking saga, please hit the subscribe button. It truly helps our channel continue bringing these historical tales to life. Now, let's return to the battle for Kattegat. Eirik signaled Freydis to hold position behind the woodpile of a tanner's workshop. The structure provided both concealment and a vantage point from which to observe the raiders' approach. The sounds of battle from the main defense line grew louder, the clashing of shields, war cries, and the unmistakable wet impact of weapons finding flesh. Kattegat's defenders were fully engaged, unaware of the threat moving toward their vulnerable flank. Bjorn always favored this tactic, Eric whispered, his voice a barely audible breath beneath the distant combat noise. Strike from two sides, create confusion, then push for slaughter once the defense breaks. He lacks imagination. Yet it seems effective, Freydis observed, noting how the flanking party had nearly reached the position from which they could strike the defenders' exposed backs. Effectiveness matters more than originality in battle, Eric conceded. His pale eyes narrowed as he assessed the approaching warriors. We strike when they pass between the storehouse and smithy. The narrow passage will prevent them from spreading. Out. I'll take the lead warriors. You handle any who break through. Freydis gripped her axe tighter, feeling her heartbeat settle into the familiar calm that always descended before combat. And if we fall? Eric's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile on another man. Then we journey to Valhalla together, Shield Maiden. Though I suspect Bjorn Blackhand would be disappointed to learn, I died fighting his underlings rather than facing him directly. They moved silently into position, using the shadows between buildings to avoid detection. The sphere flanking party had slowed their advance, clearly listening for any sign they had been discovered. Their leader, a bear-like man with a matted beard decorated with small metal rings, raised his hand, signaling his men to prepare for the final rush toward the unsuspecting defenders. Eirik glanced at Freydis, gave a barely perceptible nod, then launched himself from concealment with a war cry that shattered the tense silence. His sword caught the first raider across the throat before the man could raise his shield, sending a spray of blood across the packed earth. The second warrior managed to turn, but Eric's follow-through sliced through the man's forearm, causing his axe to clatter uselessly to the ground. Freydis moved an instant after Eric, targeting the warriors attempting to circle around the immediate chaos. Her smaller shield deflected a hasty spear thrust, allowing her to step inside the weapon's reach. She drove the edge of her shield into the raider's face, feeling cartilage crunch beneath the impact. As he staggered backward, she brought her axe around in a tight arc that found the gap between his leather armor and helmet, biting deep into his neck. The element of surprise gave them a momentary advantage, but the sphere raiders recovered quickly. These were not untested youths on their first raid, but hardened warriors who had survived countless battles. They adjusted their formation, 3 men moving to engage Eric while 2 others turned toward Freydis, clearly identifying her as the weaker threat based on her gender despite the evidence of her first kill. Their mistake proved fatal for one, who advanced with his shield lowered, expecting an amateur's wild swing. Instead, Freydis drove forward, ramming her shield's metal boss into his sternum with bone-cracking force. As he doubled over, she brought her axe down between his shoulder blades, the sharp blade cleaving through leather to find the spine beneath. The second warrior approached more cautiously, his sword weaving patterns designed to distract and create openings. Freydis recognized the technique, a common tactic used against opponents with axes, exploiting the weapon's lack of defensive capability. She gave ground steadily, allowing him to believe his strategy was working, waiting for the aggressive thrust she knew would come. When it did, she pivoted sharply, letting the sword pass harmlessly alongside her ribs while bringing her axe handle up to trap the extended blade. Before the raider could recover, she drove her shield edge into his weapon hand, feeling bones snap beneath the impact. His sword fell from nerveless fingers, and Freydis completed her movement with a horizontal axe swing that opened his throat to the spine. Nearby, Eirik fought with the controlled fury that had earned him the name Ulfhoin. Unlike the berserk rage that left warriors vulnerable in their frenzy, his was a calculated savagery, each movement precise, each strike aimed at vulnerable points, his defense seamlessly integrated with his attacks. 2 raiders already lay, dead at his feet while the third fell back, blood streaming from a deep cut across his thigh. The remaining sphere warriors reassessed their situation quickly. What should have been a simple flanking maneuver had turned into a costly engagement before they could even reach their primary objective. Their leader barked a command in their native dialect, and the 4 surviving raiders formed a tight defensive formation, clearly intending to disengage and rejoin the main force. "They'll warn Bjorn," Eirik growled, his breathing heavy but controlled. A cut above his eye leaked blood down his face, giving him a fearsome aspect. "We cannot let them escape." Freydis nodded her understanding, already moving to circle right, while Eirik took the left approach. The sphere leader recognized the tactic immediately, shouting for his men to break through Freydis's position, again identifying her as the weaker obstacle. 3 warriors peeled off toward her while the leader himself moved to delay Eirik. It was a sound tactical choice against ordinary opponents, but it failed to account for the reality facing them. Freydis had not survived the destruction of her home settlement and the battles that followed by fighting like an ordinary warrior. Against multiple opponents, she abandoned conventional combat techniques, relying instead on the lessons learned during desperate struggles against overwhelming odds. As the 3 sphere warriors charged her position, Freydis dropped to one knee, making herself a smaller target while bracing her shield against the ground. The lead attacker's momentum carried his strike over her head, exposing his legs to her axe. The blade bit deep into his calf, severing tendons and dropping him howling to the earth. Without pausing, she rolled sideways to avoid the second warrior's downward strike, his axe embedding itself in the ground where she had knelt an instant before. As he struggled to free the weapon, Freydis regained her feet and drove her shield's iron rim into his temple with all the force her lithe frame could generate. The impact dropped him senseless, blood pouring from his shattered ear. Freydis had not survived the razing of her settlement by fighting like a conventional warrior. When her family's homestead burned 3 seasons past, she had stood over her fallen father's body, wielding his broken spear against 4 raiders, until the remaining village defenders rallied to her side. That day had taught her that survival in battle often meant abandoning the formal combat techniques taught to young warriors in favor of the brutal pragmatism that kept one alive when outnumbered. The 3rd warrior proved more difficult. He kept his distance, wielding a short spear that he thrust repeatedly toward Freydis's face and torso, preventing her from closing to axe range. Each attack forced her to give ground, gradually backing her toward the narrow passage between buildings where her mobility would be further limited. Recognizing the tactic, Freydis feinted a stumble, appearing to lose her footing on the uneven ground. The sphere warrior instantly pressed his advantage, lunging forward with a thrust aimed at her chest. Instead of attempting to recover her stance, Freydis committed fully to the fall, dropping beneath the spear's trajectory. As she hit the ground, she released her shield and gripped her axe with both hands, swinging upward with all her strength. The blade caught the charging warrior at the juncture of thigh and groin, slicing through the major vessels hidden beneath the leather armor. Blood fountained from the massive wound as the man collapsed, his scream choked off as shock claimed him. Freydis rolled clear of the falling body, reclaiming her shield as she regained her feet. Across the clearing, Eric had dispatched the sphere leader with brutal efficiency, his sword thrust up beneath the man's chin and through his skull. As the last raider fell, an unnatural silence descended over their small battlefield, broken only by the continued sounds of combat from the main defense line and the gurgling gasps of the dying. "You fight well," Eric observed, wiping his blade on a fallen raider's cloak. "Not like a warrior trained in formation, but like one who has learned that survival matters more than honor." "Honor feeds no children and protects no homes," Freydis replied, checking her axe's edge for damage. "My father taught me to win, not to look impressive while dying." A grim smile crossed Eric's blood-spattered face. "A wise man, your father." He glanced toward the main battle, his expression hardening. "Come. Bjorn will have held warriors in reserve. We must warn Thorvald of the threat." They moved swiftly toward the sounds of battle, passing between buildings where frightened faces watched from doorways and shuttered windows. The main engagement had pushed back from the settlement's edge, a positive sign that Kattegat's defenders had at least held their line against the initial assault. The scene that greeted them at the village center confirmed this assessment. The defending warriors had formed a solid shield wall that had absorbed and repelled the sphere charge. Bodies lay scattered before the defensive line, predominantly bearing the markings of the attacking force. Thorvald stood at the center of his warriors, his voice rising above the din as he directed reinforcements to strengthen weak points in their formation. Eric shouldered his way through the rear ranks, Freydis close behind him. Warriors turned to challenge their approach, then recognized Eric and gave way, though many cast surprised or disapproving glances at Freydis's blood-spattered form. "Thorvald!" Eric called as they reached the chieftain. "Bjorn Blackhand leads them. The flanking party is eliminated, but he will have kept his best warriors in reserve for a push once he expected the rear attack to create chaos." Thorvald's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Freydis armed and bloodied beside Eric, but he asked no questions, immediately grasping the tactical implications of the information. "Where is Håkon?" Thorvald demanded, scanning the defensive line. "Still at the southern approach with his men," responded one of his lieutenants. "No attack has materialized there." Eric shook his head. "Bjorn won't waste men on a southern diversion when his flanking maneuver failed. He'll commit everything to a frontal assault now, hoping to break through by sheer force." As if summoned by his words, a horn blasted from the tree line, followed by war cries as a fresh wave of raiders emerged from the forest. Unlike the first attackers, these warriors wore matching wolfskin cloaks over their armor, their shields painted with a black hand symbol, Bjorn Blackhand's personal guard, held in reserve until this moment. "Shore up the center," Thorvald commanded, his voice cutting through the momentary consternation that rippled through the defenders' ranks. "Second line, prepare to rotate forward. Archers, target their leader." The Kattegat warriors responded with disciplined efficiency, reinforcing their formation as the elite sphere raiders charged toward their position. Eirik moved without being ordered to strengthen the right flank, his experience immediately recognized and welcomed by the warriors already in position. Freydis found herself momentarily adrift, neither dismissed nor assigned a place in the defense. Sigrid appeared at her side, a sword belted at her own waist, a reminder that in these northern settlements, even the women of high status knew how to defend their homes when necessity demanded. "The left flank wavers," she said without preamble, nodding toward a section of the line where younger, less experienced warriors struggled to maintain their shield positions. "Thorvald has no men to spare there." It was an observation, not a command. Yet Freydis understood the implicit message. Without reply, she moved toward the vulnerable position, sliding into place beside a youth barely old enough to bear arms, his face pale beneath his helmet as the enemy charge approached. "Hold firm," she told him, settling her shield to overlap with his. "Match your movements to mine. They expect you to break under pressure. Prove them wrong." The boy nodded jerkily, his knuckles white around his spear shaft, but his stance, steadying as Freydis's presence gave him something to anchor against. Along the line, other young warriors glanced her way, uncertainty in their eyes at finding a woman among their ranks, but too desperate to reject any help that might keep them alive through the coming onslaught. The elite sphere warriors struck, the Kattegat line like a wave crashing against cliffs, a thunderous impact that tested every shield joint and every defender's footing. The disciplined defense absorbed the initial shock, but the attackers' greater experience quickly began probing for weaknesses, concentrating force against points where the line seemed thinnest. Freydis felt the pressure building against her section, as three massive raiders focused their attacks on the younger defenders, hammering at their shields with axes designed to split wood and bone alike. Beside her, the boy grunted with pain as a particularly heavy blow numbed his shield arm, creating a momentary gap in the defense. Without hesitation, Freydis shifted her position, extending her own shield to cover the vulnerable space while simultaneously thrusting her axe forward through the opening. The blade caught one attacker beneath his raised arm, finding the gap in his armor between chest and shoulder. He staggered backward, weapon falling from suddenly lifeless fingers as blood poured from the wound. The boy beside her recovered his stance, his eyes wide with mingled fear and gratitude as the defensive line reformed. "Hold!" she called to the wavering youths. "They expect us to break. Together now. Push back." Something in her voice, the natural command of one accustomed to being obeyed in battle, steadied the faltering defenders. As one, they braced their feet and pushed forward with their shields, creating precious space between themselves and their attackers. In that brief respite, spears thrust forward from the second rank, finding targets among the momentarily off-balance raiders. Across the battlefield, a towering figure in a bearskin cloak directed the sphere assault, Bjorn Blackhand himself, immediately recognizable by the distinctive black-dyed leather covering his right hand and forearm. His gaze swept the Kattegat, defense, clearly searching for weaknesses to exploit. When his eyes fell upon the section where Freydis fought alongside the young defenders, his expression changed from calculated assessment to predatory focus. With a wordless roar, he signaled to his elite guards, redirecting their efforts toward the left flank where he perceived the greatest vulnerability. Thorvald saw the maneuver and shouted orders to reinforce the position, but the defenders were already fully committed, with no reserves to spare. Eirik, fighting at the opposite flank, recognized Bjorn's tactic immediately. "Thorvald," he called. Over the din of battle. "He targets the left. Permission to reinforce." The chieftain nodded grimly, understanding that shifting his most experienced warrior would weaken one position to strengthen another. A calculated risk, but necessary as Bjorn's elite guards began pushing with renewed vigor against the section, where Freydis and the younger warriors fought to maintain their line. Eirik cut his way along the rear of the formation, dropping one sphere raider who had broken through before reaching the endangered left flank. He arrived as the pressure against Freydis's section intensified, with Bjorn himself now joining the assault, his massive war axe crashing against shields with bone-jarring force. "The beast himself comes to us," Eirik said as he took position. Beside Freydis, his eyes locked on Bjorn with naked hatred. "How convenient. You know him well," Freydis observed, adjusting her stance to accommodate Eirik's presence in the line. Too well. Eirik's face had transformed, the cold calculation replaced by something darker and more personal. "He was my second-in-command for 5 seasons before he arranged a mutiny, took my ship, and left me for dead on a barren skerry with enough water for 3 days. He has worn that black glove since the day I nearly took his hand during the struggle." Bjorn seemed to sense their conversation, despite the chaos of battle. His eyes found Eirik, widening with momentary shock before narrowing in recognition and rage. He bellowed something in his native tongue, a challenge perhaps, or a curse, and began forcing his way directly toward Eirik's position, his guards clearing a path through the defenders with brutal efficiency. "He comes for me," Eirik said with grim satisfaction, and in doing so, makes his final mistake. The defensive line bulged inward as Bjorn and his elite warriors concentrated their attack on a single point, the position where Eirik and Freydis stood shoulder to shoulder. The young warriors around them fought with desperate courage, but the overwhelming force directed against them gradually pushed them backward, step by step, shield edges splintering under repeated impacts. "We cannot hold like this," Freydis warned as another youth fell beside her, a sphere spear thrust catching him beneath the chin above his shield's protection. "We don't need to hold," Eirik responded, his eyes never leaving Bjorn. "We need to kill him. Cut the head from the snake and the body dies." Understanding dawned in Freydis's mind, a strategy born of necessity rather than conventional tactics. "Break the line deliberately," she murmured. "Draw him in." Eirik's cold smile was her only answer. Together, they began a controlled withdrawal, creating what appeared to be a collapsing defensive position. The young warriors beside them followed their lead instinctively, falling back in good order rather than breaking in panic. To Bjorn, watching from just behind his frontline troops, it must have seemed that his concentrated attack had finally discovered a fatal weakness in Kattegat's defense. He pressed forward eagerly, signaling his elite warriors to exploit the apparent breach. The sphere raiders surged into the gap, Bjorn himself leading the charge, clearly intent on being the first to break through into the settlement proper. His focus remained fixed on Eirik, personal vendetta overriding tactical caution. It was exactly what they had intended. As Bjorn pushed forward, he and his closest guards found themselves separated from the main sphere force, drawn into a carefully crafted pocket between buildings where their numerical advantage was neutralized by the confined space. The young defenders who had seemed to flee in disarray suddenly reformed in disciplined ranks before and behind the raiders, cutting off both advance and retreat. Eirik stepped forward into the open space at the center of the trap, his sword held in a formal challenge position. "Bjorn Blackhand," he called, his voice carrying over the suddenly diminished sounds of battle. "3 winters I have waited for this moment. 3 winters since you took my ship, my crew, and left me to die alone on barren rocks." Bjorn's scarred face contorted with rage as he realized the trap that had closed around him. His elite guards formed a protective circle, their shields facing outward against the Kattegat defenders who now surrounded them in the narrow space between storage buildings. "Ulfjoin," he spat, using Eirik's old battle name. "I watched the sea eagles circling your body on that skerry. How did you survive?" "Disappointed?" Eirik's voice remained calm, though his eyes burned with cold hatred. The eagles fed on Sphere. Raiders that day, not on me. Traitors found me before the third sunset. Bjorn's laugh held no humor. Always fortunate, but luck abandons all men eventually. His gaze shifted briefly to Freydis, who stood ready beside Eirik. You surround yourself with women now? How far the mighty have fallen. Before we continue, with Eirik's response, if you're enjoying this Viking tale of betrayal and vengeance, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow's video will reveal the ancient burial rites that inspired these warrior cultures. Now, back to the confrontation. At Kattegat, this woman has killed more of your men today than you've managed to kill of ours, Eirik replied evenly. Perhaps you should concern yourself with your own diminished standing. Around them, the battle had transformed. Word had spread through the Kattegat defenders that the Sphere leader was trapped, separated from the main raiding force. The settlement's warriors pressed forward with renewed vigor against the remaining attackers, who fought with decreasing coordination as rumors of their leader's predicament reached them. Bjorn assessed his situation with the practiced eye of a veteran raider. Though surrounded, his elite guards remained a formidable fighting unit. 6 hardened warriors with quality weapons and armor, led by a commander known for his brutality and cunning. The narrowness of their position limited. How many defenders could engage them at once, partially negating their numerical disadvantage? You think you've won? He called to Thorvald, who now approached through the ranks of his warriors. But my ships still wait in the hidden cove north of here. More warriors stand ready. This was merely the first wave. A lie born of desperation, Thorvald responded, his voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to command. Our scouts report only 2 longships, both now under our control. Your reinforcements exist only in your imagination, Bjorn Blackhand. Uncertainty flickered briefly across the faces of Bjorn's guards, a momentary wavering that did not escape Eirik's notice. He stepped forward, sword held ready, but not yet attacking. Your men begin to understand their situation, he observed, quietly. Their loyalty to you is admirable but misplaced. Surrender now. Face me in single combat, and I will guarantee their lives are spared. A muscle twitched beneath Bjorn's left eye, the only outward sign of his internal calculations. And if I refuse? Then none of you leave this place alive, Eirik stated simply. Your men die for your pride, and songs will tell how Bjorn Blackhand cowered behind shields rather than face his former captain. The challenge struck at the heart of what mattered most to men like Bjorn: reputation and the stories that would survive them. His guards exchanged glances, their expressions revealing the impact of Eirik's words. A leader who sacrificed his men needlessly when offered honorable alternatives would find future loyalty difficult to secure. Single combat, then, Bjorn growled, stepping forward from the protective circle of his guards. To the death, as it should have been 3 winters ago? Thorvald raised his hand, commanding his warriors to maintain their positions, but not attack. The impromptu arena cleared as defenders and Sphere guards alike stepped back, forming a rough circle around the 2 adversaries. Freydis remained at the edge, her axe ready, watching not just the coming fight, but the expressions of Bjorn's men, alert for any sign of treachery. Bjorn drew his sword, a massive weapon with a blade nearly as long as a man's leg, its surface etched with runes that seemed to shimmer in the late afternoon light. In his other hand, he carried a short-handled axe, a combination that allowed for both powerful strikes and quick defensive movements. He rolled his massive shoulders, settling. His armor, the black leather covering his right arm stark against the polished metal of his mail. Eirik carried only his sword, a plainly crafted but well-maintained weapon that had clearly seen extensive use. He wore less armor than his opponent, a simple leather jerkin reinforced with small metal plates rather than the full mail shirt. That protected Bjorn. The disparity made his intentions clear. He valued speed over protection, gambling that agility would serve him better than absorption of blows. No formal announcement preceded the combat. One moment the adversaries stood measuring each other, the next they exploded into motion. Bjorn attacked with surprising speed. For his size, his great sword sweeping in a horizontal arc that would have severed Eric at the waist had it connected. But Eirik was no longer there, having dropped to one knee beneath the blade's path before lunging forward with a thrust aimed at Bjorn's exposed thigh. The sphere leader twisted away, the sword tip scoring a shallow cut along his leg rather than finding the deep muscle. His counterattack came instantly, the hand axe sweeping downward toward Eric's extended arm. Only a desperate roll saved Eric from losing his sword hand, the axe blade striking sparks from the packed earth where he had been an instant before. They separated, circling again, each having measured the other's speed and initial tactics. The watching warriors remained silent, understanding they witnessed not merely a fight, but a moment that would be remembered in stories for generations to come. The confrontation between betrayer and betrayed, with the fate of Kattegat hanging. In the balance, Bjorn attacked again, but differently this time. A feint with the sword followed immediately by a genuine attack with the axe, aimed at Eric's head. The combination nearly succeeded, the axe blade passing close enough to Eric's face that several strands of his silver-streaked hair drifted to the ground, severed by the weapon's edge. Eric countered with a series of swift strikes, his sword a blur as he probed Bjorn's defenses, searching for weaknesses in the bigger man's guard. Where Bjorn fought with power and controlled aggression, Eric's style was all precision and economy of movement. No energy wasted, no strike without purpose. A pattern emerged as the combat continued. Bjorn held the advantage in reach and raw power, forcing Eirik to remain defensive, constantly moving to avoid the devastating blows that could end the fight with a single connection. But each attack taxed Bjorn's endurance, the heavy weapons and armor gradually slowing his movements as exhaustion built in his massive frame. Freydis saw the strategy in Eric's fighting. He was deliberately extending the combat, allowing Bjorn to tire himself while conserving his own strength. It was the approach of a warrior who had faced stronger opponents before and understood that victory often came not through superior force, but through patience and timing. The first serious wound came as Bjorn overextended on a powerful downward strike that Eric sidestepped rather than blocked. As the sword bit into the earth, Eric's blade sliced across Bjorn's forearm, cutting through the black leather to find flesh beneath. Blood darkened the distinctive covering, dripping from Bjorn's fingertips as he snarled in pain and rage. "First blood to the dead man," Bjorn growled, switching his sword to a one-handed grip while flexing his injured arm. "Enjoy the small victory. It will be your last." Eric made no response, his focus absolute as he continued his measured defense, waiting for the opening that must eventually come. Blood loss and exertion would ensure it. He needed only to survive until that moment arrived. The combat's rhythm shifted subtly as Bjorn's injuries and fatigue accumulated. His attacks became more desperate, sacrificing precision for power, seeking to end the fight quickly before his strength failed completely. Twice more Eirik's blade found openings, inflicting wounds to Bjorn's shoulder and thigh, not immediately debilitating but contributing to the gradual weakening of his opponent. "Finish him, Ulfheoin," called one of the Kattegat warriors, breaking the respectful silence that had surrounded the combat. The shout proved fatally distracting. For an instant, Eirik's concentration wavered, his eyes flicking toward the voice. Bjorn, despite his wounds, retained the predatory instincts that had made him a feared raider. He lunged forward, abandoning defense entirely, accepting Eirik's sword thrust through his shoulder as the price for delivering his own attack. Eirik realized his error too late. As Bjorn charged into him, taking the sword wound without faltering, Eirik tried to disengage and create distance. But the sphere leader's greater mass drove him backward, off balance and vulnerable. Bjorn's hand axe swept upward in a vicious arc, finding Eirik's unprotected side just below the ribs. A collective gasp rose from the watching warriors as the axe bit deep, lodging in Eirik's flesh. Blood sprayed across the packed earth as Bjorn wrenched the weapon free, his face contorted in a grimace of pain and triumph. Eric staggered but did not fall, his left hand pressed against the wound, blood seeping between his fingers, while his right maintained its grip on his sword. His face had gone pale, but his eyes burned with undiminished intensity as he reset his stance. "A mortal wound," Bjorn announced, circling his injured opponent like a wolf around dying prey. "You feel it already. The cold spreading through your body, the strength leaving your limbs. How long will you last, Ulfhoin? Long enough to see me take your head as a trophy?" Freydis tensed, her knuckles white around her axe handle. The combat's outcome seemed suddenly, terribly decided. Eric's wound was indeed severe, the kind that warriors recognized as eventually fatal, even when survived initially. Yet something in his bearing communicated that the fight remained unfinished, that Bjorn's victory celebration came prematurely. "You always did talk too much," Eric responded, his voice strained but steady. "Another failing I should have corrected years ago." With shocking speed for a mortally wounded man, he darted forward, inside the arc of Bjorn's longer weapon. The movement reopened his wound, fresh blood soaking his tunic, but brought him close enough that Bjorn's sword became momentarily useless. Before the sphere leader could bring his axe to bear, Eric's blade thrust upward beneath Bjorn's chin, through the soft tissue of the throat, and into the brain beyond. Bjorn's eyes widened in shock, his weapons falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. A wet, gurgling sound emerged from his ruined throat as Eirik leaned close, supporting himself against his dying enemy. "The eagles feast on sphere flesh again tonight," Eric whispered, twisting the blade once before withdrawing it. Bjorn Blackhand, terror of the northern coasts, collapsed to his knees, then pitched forward onto his face, dead before he struck the ground. A moment of absolute silence followed as both Kattegat defenders and sphere raiders absorbed the combat's outcome. Eric remained standing, wavering slightly, his sword point resting on the earth as he fought to maintain consciousness. Blood pooled at his feet, the wound in his side clearly severe despite his victory. He turned toward Bjorn's stunned guards, his voice carrying the iron command of a natural leader despite his weakened state. "Your chieftain is dead," he declared. "I claimed his life by right of personal combat. Now I claim his men by right of conquest. Lay down your weapons and live. Raise them and join him in death." The elite guards exchanged glances, calculating their chances. With their leader fallen and the main sphere force already in retreat, continuing the fight offered little prospect beyond a glorious death. One by one, they lowered their weapons, placing swords and axes on the ground before them. As the last weapon touched earth, Eric's strength finally failed him. He collapsed to one knee, then would have fallen completely had Freydis not lunged forward to catch him. She lowered him gently to the ground, pressing her hand against his wound in a futile attempt to stem the bleeding. "Get Sigrid," Thorvald commanded one of his men, "and tell her to bring her healing supplies, quickly!" Freydis tore strips from her tunic, packing them against Eirik's wound. His skin had gone ashen, his breathing shallow, but his eyes remained clear as they fixed on her face. "You should have been a shield maiden," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Not a bride sent to warm some chieftain's son's bed." "Perhaps I was always meant to be both," Freydis replied, maintaining pressure on the wound. "As you were always meant to face Bjorn again, despite the years between." A ghost of a smile touched Eric's bloodless lips. The Norns weave strange patterns. His gaze shifted to Thorvald, who knelt opposite Freydis. "The oath I swore to you is fulfilled. Bjorn will raid no more settlements under your protection." Thorvald clasped Eirik's shoulder, his expression solemn. "At great cost, old friend. At great cost." Sigrid arrived with her medicines and herbs, kneeling beside the wounded warrior without ceremony. Her experienced hands examined the injury, her face revealing the gravity of what she found. "Can you save him?" Thorvald asked quietly. That depends on him as much as me, Sigrid replied, already beginning to clean the wound. And on how strongly the Valkyries call to him tonight. Help me move him to the hall. This is no place for healing. Arts. As 4 warriors carefully lifted Eric onto a makeshift stretcher, Freydis remained at his side, her hand still pressed against the wound. Around them, the settlement's defenders secured the sphere prisoners and tended to their own wounded. The immediate crisis passed now that the raiders' leader had fallen. Hakon appeared from the southern approach, his men in formation behind him, weapons ready though they had seen no combat. His expression darkened as he took in the scene. The blood-soaked ground where Eric and Bjorn had fought, his father directing the aftermath, and most significantly, Freydis kneeling beside Eric's stretcher, her clothes and hands stained. Crimson! What happened here? He demanded, his voice carrying more confusion than authority. We heard fighting but received no orders to join. Bjorn Blackhand is dead, Thorvald informed his son, his tone matter-of-fact rather than celebratory. His raiders either fled or surrendered. Kattegat stands secure, though not without cost. Hakon's gaze remained fixed on Freydis, taking in her blood-spattered appearance and the axe still hanging from her belt. You fought? He asked, disbelief evident in his voice. My intended bride took up arms like some shield maiden from the old stories? I fought, Freydis confirmed, rising to her feet as the stretcher-bearers carried Eirik toward the great hall. As did every person capable of defending this settlement, man or woman. She helped save us all, added one of the young warriors who had stood beside her in the shield wall. Held the line when we might have broken. Killed more sphere raiders than many who trained their whole lives for battle. Murmurs of agreement rose from those nearby who had witnessed Freydis's actions. Hakon's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally something resembling disgust mixed with wounded pride. That is not the behavior of a chieftain's wife, he declared stiffly. The arrangement will need to be reconsidered. Before Freydis could respond, Sigrid stepped between them, her voice sharp as a blade. The reconsideration can wait until after we've tended our wounded and honored our dead, Hakon. Your priorities reveal much about your readiness to lead. The rebuke, delivered publicly by his own mother, caused Hakon to flush with embarrassment. He retreated a step, then turned abruptly, and stalked away, ordering his men to help secure the settlement's perimeter. Come, Sigrid said to Freydis, her tone softening slightly. Eric will need skilled hands if he's to survive the night. You've shown yourself capable in battle. Now show me if you're equally capable in healing. As they walked toward the great hall, Freydis caught Thorvald watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Not the disapproval she had expected, nor the gratitude one might show a valued ally. Instead, he seemed to be measuring her against some internal standard, reassessing what he thought he knew about the woman who had arrived to marry his son. The settlement around them began the transition from battlefield to community once more. Warriors stacked weapons and removed armor. Women emerged from protected buildings with food and drink for the defenders, and children tentatively ventured outdoors, their wide eyes taking in the aftermath of violence most had never witnessed. Before, Kattegat had survived, but the day's events had shifted something fundamental in its social fabric. A chieftain's son had remained at a safe distance while his intended bride fought in the front lines. An exiled warrior had returned to save the settlement that had once rejected him, and a woman sent to be a submissive wife had revealed herself as a fighter worthy of the old sagas. As night fell over the fjord, none could say with certainty what the morning would bring. Dawn broke over Kattegat with pale light filtering through lingering mist, revealing the aftermath of battle in stark clarity. Cleanup had begun before first light. Bodies of fallen sphere raiders dragged to a distant field where they would be buried without ceremony, blood-soaked earth covered with fresh sand, damaged buildings already undergoing repairs as the settlement reclaimed itself from the chaos of combat. Inside the great hall, a different kind of battle had raged through. The night, Eirik Ravenson lay on a bed of furs near the central hearth, his normally imposing frame looking diminished against the dark pelts. Sigrid had worked tirelessly over his wound, cleaning, stitching, and applying poultices of herbs known to fight. The corruption that often followed battlefield injuries, Freydis had assisted without rest, following the older woman's instructions with the same focused intensity she brought to combat. "His fever breaks," Sigrid murmured, placing a hand on Eric's forehead as the first light of day touched the halls. High windows. "The gods have not chosen to call him to their feast tables yet." Freydis nodded, exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath her eyes, but relief visible in their depths. "He is strong. Stronger than Bjorn expected." "Stronger than most men," Sigrid agreed, straightening with a wince as her aging joints protested the movement after hours of kneeling, "including my son." If you're enjoying this saga of battle and honor in the Viking Age, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more historical tales that bring the past to life. Now, let's return to Kattegat as the settlement recovers from the raid. The words hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement neither woman had been willing to voice during the desperate hours of the night. Hakon's absence from the healing work had been conspicuous, particularly when other warriors, despite their own injuries and exhaustion, had regularly arrived to inquire about Eric's condition or bring supplies Sigrid required. "My son has many qualities that will serve him well as a leader in times of peace," Sigrid continued after a moment, her voice carrying the measured tone of one who has spent years balancing truth with loyalty. "He understands trade, knows when to negotiate rather than fight, and can recite the history of every important family from here to Uppsala. But yesterday revealed what I have long suspected. He lacks the warrior's heart that our people still respect above all else." "Not every great leader must be a great warrior," Freydis offered, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. In the northern settlements, a chieftain who could not lead in battle rarely held power for long. Sigrid's smile held little warmth. "A diplomatic answer. But we both know the truth of this world we inhabit. A leader need not be the strongest fighter, but he must be willing to stand with his warriors when blood is shed." Hakon remained at the southern approach long after it became clear no attack would materialize there. Before Freydis could respond, Eric stirred on his palate, a low groan escaping his lips as consciousness brought awareness of his wound. Both women immediately turned their attention to him, Sigrid checking the bandages while Freydis prepared a draught of willow bark tea to ease his pain. "How long?" Eric rasped, his voice rough from thirst and fever. "You've outrun the Valkyries." "For one night," Sigrid informed him, offering a cup of water. "Whether you continue to do so depends on how well you follow my instructions in the days ahead." A ghost of Eric's cold smile touched his bloodless lips. "I've never been skilled at following instructions." "Then develop the talent quickly," she replied tartly. "Or Bjorn will have his revenge from beyond the grave." The hall's doors opened, admitting Thorvald along with several of his advisors and prominent warriors. The chieftain approached Eric's pallet, his expression revealing relief at finding the wounded man conscious. "The raven lives," he declared, using Eric's old epithet. "Good. There are matters we must discuss while your mind remains clear." Sigrid made a sound of disapproval. "His wound is barely closed, Thorvald. Whatever matters concern you can surely wait until he's stronger." "Some things cannot wait," Thorvald countered, though his tone was gentle. "The surviving sphere raiders have been contained, but decisions must be made about their fate. And Bjorn's ships now sit in our harbor, valuable prizes that already cause whispers of who deserves claim to them." Eirik struggled to push himself into a sitting position, waving off Freydis's attempt to assist him. "The ships are mine by right," he stated, his voice weak but determined. "Bjorn took them from me. I reclaimed them with his blood." "None dispute your right," Thorvald assured him. "But there are questions about your intentions. You arrived in Kattegat as a lone warrior an exile returned after many seasons. Now you potentially command 2 longships and their contents. Some wonder if you plan to rebuild your old life as a raider, perhaps using our harbor as your base. The tension in the hall thickened as warriors and advisors watched Eric carefully, many hands resting casually near weapon hilts. For all his current weakness, Eirik Ravenson's reputation ensured that none would underestimate the threat he might pose if he chose to return to his former ways as one of the coast's most feared raiders. 3 years ago, Eric began, his voice strengthening as he spoke. I would have taken those ships and sailed within a day, gathering a crew from the desperate and discontented found in any settlement. But 3 years change a man, especially years spent believing each day might be his last. He paused, his pale eyes moving from face to face before settling on Thorvald. I did not come to Kattegat by accident. I came because word reached me that Bjorn had been seen raiding settlements under your protection. I came because 20 years ago, when we were both young warriors, you saved my life during the battle at Kvinnerad. A blood debt I could finally repay. Murmurs spread through the gathered crowd at this revelation. Few had known of this connection between their chieftain and the infamous Ulf Hoyne. Thorvald himself looked momentarily startled that Eric would speak so openly of a debt between them. The debt was paid yesterday, Thorvald acknowledged with a formal nod. Paid in full with your blood and Bjorn's. Then I stand before you with no debts outstanding, either owed or owing, Eric continued. A free man with 2 ships to his name and decisions to make about his future. His gaze shifted to where Freydis stood quietly beside Sigrid. Decisions perhaps best considered after I've regained my strength. Thorvald studied his old comrade thoughtfully before turning to address the gathered warriors. Eirik Ravenson fought for Kattegat yesterday as if it were his own home. For that, he has earned our hospitality while he heals. The ships will remain in our harbor, untouched, until he decides their fate. As for the sphere prisoners, they will work to repair the damage caused by their raid, and when that is complete, they may choose to either swear loyalty to Kattegat or depart with nothing but the clothes they wear. This judgment, delivered with the unquestionable authority of a chieftain secure in his position, settled the immediate concerns of those gathered. One by one, the warriors and advisors departed to attend to their duties, leaving only Thorvald, Sigrid, Freydis, and the injured Eric in the central area of the hall. You should rest now, Sigrid instructed Eric. The wound needs time to heal, and talking depletes strength you cannot afford to waste. Eric nodded, already sinking back onto his pallet, the brief conversation having drained what little energy he had recovered. His eyes closed, though the tension in his body suggested he remained conscious, merely conserving his strength. Thorvald gestured for Freydis and Sigrid to follow him to a more private area of the hall, well away from where Eirik rested. Once, they were seated at a small table. He poured mead into 3 cups, pushing one toward Freydis with an evaluating look. You fought well yesterday, he stated without preamble, better than many warriors who have trained since boyhood. This was not your first battle. No, Freydis confirmed, accepting the cup but not drinking. My settlement in the eastern lands was raided 3 seasons past. I fought beside my father until he fell, then continued fighting to protect what remained of our people. Yet those who arranged your marriage to my son described you as a proper bride, skilled in household crafts rather than warfare, Thorvald observed. No accusation in his tone, merely curiosity. They told your representatives what they believed. You wish to hear, Freydis replied honestly. A settlement needs alliances to survive. My fighting skills would not have secured that alliance, but my supposed domestic virtues might. Sigrid made a small sound that might have been amusement. And now you find yourself in a peculiar position. The man you were sent to marry clearly finds your true nature disturbing, while many others in Kattegat have come to respect you precisely because of the qualities you were meant to hide, including my husband and myself, Thorvald added, raising his cup in a small gesture of acknowledgement. Kattegat needs strong people, not just strong arms to swing swords, but strong hearts to make difficult choices. Yesterday you showed both. Freydis regarded them warily, uncertain where this conversation led. What are you suggesting? Nothing for the moment, Thorvald replied. But know this, while the marriage arrangement with Håkon may not proceed as originally intended, your place in Kattegat is secure if you wish to remain. No one who fought as you did will be sent away unwillingly. With that cryptic statement, he rose and departed, leaving Freydis alone with Sigrid, who studied the younger woman with shrewd eyes. My husband rarely offers such assurances without purpose, Sigrid noted. He sees something in you beyond yesterday's courage, something Kattegat might need in days to come. Before Freydis could question her further, the hall doors opened again, admitting Håkon. He approached with visible reluctance, his posture suggesting he came under obligation rather than by choice. When he reached the table, he acknowledged his mother with a nod but barely glanced at Freydis. Father says the sphere prisoners are secured, he reported, clearly more comfortable discussing practical matters than addressing the tension between himself and his intended bride. They've been assigned work details under guard. The damaged storehouses should be repaired within a few days. Good, Sigrid replied. And what else did your father say when he sent you here? Håkon's jaw tightened visibly. He suggested I should speak with Freydis about yesterday, about our arrangement. Then I will leave you to that conversation, Sigrid declared, rising from her seat. She paused beside her son, lowering her voice though Freydis could still hear her words. Remember that wisdom sometimes lies in recognizing when the gods have guided us toward a different path than the one we had planned. With that enigmatic advice, she departed, moving to check on Eric's condition across the hall. Håkon stood awkwardly for a moment before taking the seat his mother had vacated. He poured himself mead but left the cup untouched, clearly gathering his thoughts before speaking. You fought well yesterday, he finally began, the words sounding rehearsed. The warriors speak highly of your courage. Thank you, Freydis replied simply, waiting to see where he would take the conversation. But it has created a complicated situation. Håkon's fingers drummed nervously on the table surface. When arrangements were made for our marriage, certain expectations were established. The woman who arrived on that ship was not the woman described in those arrangements. I never claimed to be that woman, Freydis reminded him, her voice neutral rather than defensive. Others made promises on my behalf. Nevertheless, Håkon continued, a chieftain's wife has specific duties, specific ways she must conduct herself. Our people look to their leaders not just for protection, but for adherence to tradition. A wife who takes up arms, who stands in the shield wall like a man. He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with articulating his objections directly. You believe such a woman cannot be a suitable wife for you? Freydis completed the thought for him. Håkon looked relieved that she understood without requiring him to be more explicit. Yes, exactly. My position in Kattegat is built on different strengths than my father's. He earned respect through raids and battles in his youth. I have focused on trade, on building relationships with other settlements. My wife must complement those efforts, not complicate them by defying expectations. Freydis considered his words carefully before responding. In truth, his assessment wasn't unreasonable. From his perspective, his path to leadership followed a different route than traditional warrior chieftains, and he sought a partner whose skills and temperament aligned with that vision. The arrangement had been built on false premises from the beginning, not just deceits about her nature, but fundamental misunderstandings about what each party sought from the union. What do you propose? She asked finally. Father has agreed that the alliance between our settlements can stand without the marriage, Håkon explained, tension visibly easing from his shoulders as he realized she wasn't going to argue or take offense. Your people will still receive the protection they need. As for you personally, He insists you are welcome to remain in Kattegat in whatever capacity suits you. I believe he may even offer you a position among the settlement's defenders, unusual as that would be. The offer was unexpectedly generous, maintaining the crucial alliance while freeing both Håkon and herself from a match that would have satisfied neither. Yet Freydis sensed something unspoken beneath the carefully diplomatic proposal. "And does your father have other plans he hasn't shared with you?" she inquired, intuition guiding her question. Håkon's expression confirmed her suspicion before he could compose his features. "My father's thoughts are often his own until he chooses to reveal them," he replied carefully. "But I have noticed his interest in how you assisted with Eric Ravenson's care through the night, and there has been much discussion about Eric's future now that he possesses 2 ships, but no crew to sail them." Understanding dawned gradually as Freydis connected fragments of conversation and observation from the past day. Thorvald's assured statement that her place in Kattegat was secure. Sigrid's comment about the gods guiding them toward unexpected paths. The significant looks exchanged between the chieftain and his wife whenever Eric and Freydis were mentioned together. "Your father considers the possibility that a different match might benefit Kattegat," she stated, watching Håkon's reaction closely. He nodded, a flicker of what might have been relief crossing his features. Eric Ravenson was once one of the most respected warriors along the coast before Bjorn's betrayal. With 2 ships, he could become a powerful ally for Kattegat, or a dangerous enemy if he chooses to rebuild his old raiding life. A connection to our settlement might encourage him toward the former path. "And I am the proposed connection," Freydis concluded, pieces falling into place with increasing clarity. "A shield maiden who fought beside him yesterday, who helped tend his wounds through the night. A woman whose skills and temperament might complement his, as they failed to complement yours." Håkon spread his hands in a gesture of confirmation. "It is merely speculation at this point. Eirik must heal, and both of you would have to agree to such an arrangement. But my father rarely misses an opportunity to strengthen Kattegat's position." Freydis fell silent, absorbing the implications of this unexpected turn. When she had boarded the ship bound for Kattegat, she had resigned herself to a life constrained by others' expectations, a marriage based on deception, future days spent pretending to be someone she was not for the sake of her people's security. Now, an entirely different future potentially lay before her, one that might allow her to remain true to her nature while still serving the alliance that protected her former settlement. "I need time to consider all this," she said finally. "Of course," Håkon agreed, rising from the table with visible relief that the difficult conversation had proceeded without conflict. "Nothing need be decided while Eric still fights to recover from his wounds." He hesitated, then added with unexpected sincerity, "For what it's worth, I believe you may find more happiness with a man like him than you ever would have found with me." After Håkon departed, Freydis remained seated, her mind working through the revelations of the past day like a weaver sorting threads before beginning a new pattern. Across the hall, Eric slept fitfully, his body fighting to heal the grievous wound that had nearly claimed his life. Outside, Kattegat continued its recovery from the raid, the sounds of hammers and saws filtering through the hall's walls as damaged buildings were repaired. Eventually, she rose and walked to where Eric lay beside the central hearth. His color had improved slightly, though his breathing remained shallow and his features drawn with pain, even in sleep. She studied him thoughtfully. This former raider whose path had crossed with hers in such unexpected fashion, whose future now seemed strangely intertwined with her own. "You should be resting as well," Sigrid observed, approaching quietly from behind. "You've been awake since before the raid began yesterday." "There's too much to consider for sleep to come easily," Freydis admitted. Sigrid's knowing smile suggested she understood exactly what occupied the younger woman's thoughts. "Life rarely follows the course we expect," she said, adjusting the furs covering Eirik with the practiced movements of an experienced healer. Sometimes the greatest joys come from the paths we never plan to walk. As if sensing their presence, Eirik's eyes opened, focusing first on Sigrid before shifting to Freydis. Something in his gaze changed when he saw her. A softening, perhaps, or a question forming. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice rough with pain and exhaustion. "I am," Freydis confirmed simply. "Good." His eyes closed again as sleep reclaimed him, but his hand moved slightly across the furs, as if reaching for something, or someone, before stilling once more. Sigrid touched Freydis's shoulder lightly. "Get some rest," she advised. "The coming days will require strength from all of us. Decisions about the future can wait until wounds have healed and minds are clear." As Freydis finally sought her own bed in the small chamber adjoining the main hall, she realized that for the first time since her family's settlement was destroyed, she faced a future shaped by genuine choice rather than desperate necessity. Whatever path she ultimately selected would be her own decision. Whether to remain in Kattegat as a respected shield maiden, to return to her people with the alliance secured, or perhaps to consider the possibility taking shape in Thorvald's strategic mind. The thought brought an unexpected sense of peace as exhaustion finally overcame her. Her last conscious awareness was of the sounds of life continuing around her. Voices discussing repairs, children playing outside despite yesterday's dangers, the rhythmic pounding of a blacksmith's hammer as weapons were mended and restored. Kattegat endured, as did she, with possibilities stretching before them like the open sea awaiting a well-captained ship. 3 days later, Eirik Ravenson stood unassisted for the first time since his wounding, leaning heavily on a carved staff, but insistent on walking the short distance from his sickbed to the Great Hall's main doors. Freydis accompanied him, ready to provide support if his strength failed, while Sigrid watched with the critical eye of a healer assessing her patient's progress. "You push yourself too quickly," Sigrid admonished as Eirik paused to catch his breath, his face pale with exertion. "The wound could reopen if you strain yourself. A man who remains too long on his back begins to resemble a corpse," Eirik countered, though the usual edge in his voice was softened by genuine respect for the woman who had saved his life. "I need to feel the sun on my face again." When they reached the doors, a warrior stationed there opened them without being asked, revealing Kattegat spread before them in the clear light of midday. The settlement had largely erased the visible signs of battle, damaged buildings repaired, blood-stained earth covered with fresh sand or new wooden planking, life returning to normal routines with the resilience characteristic of people long accustomed to hardship and recovery. Eirik's gaze moved immediately to the harbor, where the 2 longships captured from Bjorn's raiding party now sat at anchor, their dragonhead prows facing seaward as if eager to return to the waves. Around them, fishing boats and trading vessels continued their daily activities, the lifeblood of the settlement flowing uninterrupted despite recent violence. "They're being maintained properly," Freydis observed, following Eirik's line of sight. "Thorvald assigned men to ensure they remain seaworthy while you recover." "Thorvald thinks ahead," Eirik noted, a hint of amusement in his tone. "He always did, even as a young warrior. Always 3 steps beyond the current battle, planning for what would come after." They stood in comfortable silence for a time, watching the activity below. Workers moved with purpose throughout the settlement, some of them the captured sphere raiders now laboring to repair the damage they had caused. Under guard but without chains, they carried lumber, mixed mortar, and assisted Kattegat's craftsmen. Their status as conquered enemies balanced against practical need for their labor. "I've been thinking about those ships," Eirik said eventually. "About what comes next." Freydis waited, sensing he had more to say, but allowing him the time to find the words. During the days of his recovery, they had developed an easy companionship. Hours spent in conversation as he regained strength. She had told him of her home settlement's destruction, of fighting alongside her father, of the desperate months that followed. He, in turn, had shared stories of his years as a raider, of Bjorn's betrayal, of surviving on the barren Skerry where he had been left to die, and of the long journey back to reclaim his honor. "Thorvald has made an interesting proposal," Eric continued, his eyes still fixed on the distant ships. "He suggests I remain in Kattegat, using it as a base for trading voyages rather than raids. The ships would carry goods instead of warriors, building wealth for themselves and the settlement through commerce rather than plunder." "A significant change from your former life," Freydis observed neutrally. "Yes and no." Eirik turned slightly, to face her, leaning more heavily on his staff as the movement strained his healing wound. "The sea remains the sea, whether one crosses it for trade or war. The skills required differ less than many believe. Reading weather, navigating coastal waters, managing men in close quarters for long journeys." A faint smile crossed his face. "Though admittedly, trading partners generally prefer not to see you arrive with shields hung along the gunwales." Freydis returned his smile, imagining the reception such a sight would receive in peaceful ports. "And do you find Thorvald's proposal appealing?" "I find parts of it appealing," Eirik replied carefully. "The ships are mine by right, and I've little interest in returning to constant raiding at my age. But for such a venture to succeed, I would need more than just vessels and Thorvald's blessing." He paused, studying her face with unexpected intensity. "I would need someone I could trust absolutely, someone who understands both battle and its aftermath, someone whose judgment I've seen tested and proven sound." The implication hung in the air between them, neither an explicit offer nor a question, but a possibility presented for consideration. Freydis felt her heartbeat quicken slightly, recognizing the significance of what remained unspoken in Eirik's words. "Thorvald has suggested I might find a place in Kattegat beyond what was originally planned," she said carefully. "Though I believe his thoughts on the matter may be more fully developed than he has shared directly." Eirik's laugh held genuine amusement. "No doubt, the old wolf never reveals his entire strategy at once." His expression sobered as he continued. "But whatever Thorvald's plans might be, the choice remains yours to make. You came to Kattegat under one arrangement that no longer stands. What comes next should be decided by your will, not another's convenience." The consideration implicit in his statement touched Freydis deeply. Throughout her life, circumstances had dictated her path: daughter, fighter, survivor, arranged bride. Even her journey to Kattegat had been determined by others' decisions. Yet here stood a man who had seen her true nature in battle, who recognized her strength rather than finding it threatening, and who now offered her the dignity of genuine choice. "I have no wish to return to my former settlement," she said after a thoughtful pause. "What remains there holds too many painful memories, and my presence is unnecessary now that the alliance with Kattegat stands secure. But neither do I wish to remain here as an object of curiosity, the woman who fought like a shield maiden, neither proper bride nor acknowledged warrior." "And if another path presented itself?" Eric asked quietly. "One that valued both your fighting spirit and your wisdom? One that offered partnership rather than subordination?" Before Freydis could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Thorvald, who approached from the direction of the harbor. The chieftain nodded approval at seeing Eirik on his feet, though his expression suggested he noted the subject of their conversation and its likely significance. "The ships are ready whenever you are," Thorvald announced without preamble. "Though Sigrid will have my head if I encourage you to sail before your wound has properly healed." A wise man does not cross a healer who holds his life in her hands, Eric agreed with a wry smile. "But preparations can begin while I regain my strength. Supplies gathered, crew selected, routes planned." Thorvald's gaze shifted between Eirik and Freydis, assessing the situation with practiced perception. "And have you given thought to who might accompany you on these journeys? A trading venture requires trusted lieutenants as surely as a raid. We..." "We're discussing that very matter when you arrived," Eric replied, his tone giving nothing away beyond what he chose to reveal. "Though some decisions require time for proper consideration." The chieftain nodded, accepting the diplomatic response. "Time you have, old friend. Kattegat's hospitality remains yours for as long as necessary." He clasped Eric's forearm in the traditional warrior's grip before departing, leaving them once again to their conversation. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across Kattegat, Freydis and Eric remained at the Great Hall's entrance, watching the settlement's evening routines unfold. Neither rushed to resume their interrupted discussion, comfortable in the silence that had developed between them during Eric's recovery. Finally, as torches were lit throughout the settlement to ward off the gathering darkness, Eric turned to Freydis with the directness that characterized his approach to all matters of importance. "The arrangement with Hakon served its purpose in securing protection for your people," he stated. "But it would have wasted your true nature, the fire I saw in battle, the wisdom I've witnessed during my recovery. I offer something different. Not marriage as it's traditionally understood, but partnership on the ships and whatever journeys lie ahead. Your strength beside mine, your counsel valued, your spirit free to be as wild as the gods made it." The offer hung in the air between them, unexpected yet somehow inevitable, the culmination of paths that had converged in blood and fire, in healing and understanding. Freydis considered it not as a desperate survivor seeking security, nor as a dutiful daughter fulfilling clan obligations, but as a woman standing in the fullness of her newly acknowledged power. "And if I accept this partnership," she asked, "what would that mean for my place in Kattegat when we return from these journeys?" "Whatever you wish it to mean," Eric replied without hesitation. "Thorvald would formalize our connection through traditional means to satisfy social expectations, but between us, the terms would be our own to define. Equal voices in decisions, equal shares in whatever prosperity we find, equal respect for each other's nature." Freydis studied him closely, searching for any sign of deception or reservation in his offer. She found none, only the clear-eyed regard of a man who had survived betrayal, exile, and near death to emerge with a vision of life built on hard-earned wisdom rather than conventional expectations. "I accept," she said simply, extending her arm in the warrior's grip rather than the demure hand clasp expected between man and woman. Eric's hand closed around her forearm, his grip firm but not dominant, an acknowledgement of equality rather than an assertion of control. The pact required no further words, no elaborate promises or declarations, just the mutual recognition of two spirits who had recognized something essential in each other amid the chaos of battle and its aftermath. As they turned to re-enter the Great Hall, Freydis caught sight of Sigrid watching from a distance, a knowing smile playing across the older woman's face. Whatever Thorvald's strategic calculations might have been, his wife had perhaps understood the deeper currents flowing beneath the surface of recent events, the alignment of two souls who defied traditional categorization, yet complemented each other in ways neither had anticipated. 6 weeks later, as spring brought new growth to the land around Kattegat, 2 longships prepared to depart the harbor under Eric Ravenson's command. Their shields hung along the gunwales bore no signs of recent battle, their surfaces painted with symbols of trade and prosperity rather than the intimidating designs favored by raiders. The dragonhead prows had been adorned with carved symbols invoking Njord's blessing for safe voyages and successful commerce rather than Odin's favor in combat. On the lead ship, Eric stood at the stern, his wound healed enough for travel, though a slight stiffness in his movements suggested it would never be entirely forgotten. Beside him stood Freydis, her crimson hair now adorned with beads of amber and silver that marked her status within Kattegat's social hierarchy, not as a traditional wife, but as something new, a position created through the recognition of her unique value to both the settlement and the man whose path had joined with hers. Thorvald and Sigrid came to the dock to bid them farewell, The formal ceremony of departure acknowledging both the practical importance of the trading voyage and the symbolic significance of Eirik's transformation from feared raider to valued merchant captain. Hakon stood with them, his initial resentment, having gradually given way to pragmatic acceptance of how events had unfolded. "Return with prosperity," Thorvald called as the mooring lines were cast off. "Kattegat awaits your safe harbor." With Freydis navigating, Eirik responded with unexpected humor. "We could hardly go astray." As the ships caught the wind and moved toward the open fjord, Freydis stood tall beside her chosen partner, her hand resting lightly on the weathered wood of the steering oar. Behind them, Kattegat gradually diminished in size. The settlement that had rejected her for being too wild transformed by circumstances into the home she had never expected to find. Ahead lay unseen shores, trading opportunities, and undoubtedly challenges that would test their newfound partnership. But for the first time since her father's settlement burned, Freydis felt neither adrift nor constrained by others' expectations. The path before her had been chosen freely, her spirit recognized rather than suppressed, her strength valued rather than feared. "Ready?" Eirik asked, as the ship cleared the mouth of the fjord and the open sea spread before them. Freydis smiled, feeling the salt spray on her face and the endless possibilities that stretched to the horizon. Always. The former raider and the shield maiden sailed into legend that day, their names eventually joining the sagas told around winter fires, not for their ferocity in battle, though that remained part of their tale, but for forging a new kind of partnership that valued wildness of spirit over conformity, strength of purpose over tradition, and the courage to claim one's true nature regardless of what others might expect. If this tale of Viking valor and unexpected destiny has captured your imagination, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more historical sagas that bring the ancient world to life. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads of myths, legends, and the forgotten stories of those who changed the course of history with their courage and conviction. Until next time, may the gods grant you fair winds and following seas on your own journey.